I never thought my wedding day would become the ultimate revenge story, but here we are. My name is Sarah, and for 26 years, I lived in the shadow of my sister Emma, the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. While she basked in their endless praise and got away with everything, I was the scapegoat, blamed for her mistakes and punished for crimes I never committed. Growing up, Emma was 3 years older and seemingly perfect. She had golden blonde hair that caught the light just right, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a smile that could melt anyone's heart, especially our parents. I, on the other hand, had mousy brown hair, plain hazel eyes, and what my mother called unremarkable features. The contrast was stark, and my parents never let me forget it. "Why can't you be more like Emma?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When Emma brought home a B on her report card, it was celebrated with ice cream and praise. When I brought home straight A's, it was dismissed with, well, Emma's more well-rounded. Grades aren't everything. When Emma broke something, somehow it was my fault for not watching her properly or setting a bad example. The injustice burned in my chest, but I learned early that speaking up only made things worse. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Emma got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the first choice of everything. She received a car for her 16th birthday, a shiny red Honda that she crashed within 3 months. When my 16th rolled around, I got a lecture about responsibility and a bus pass. Emma's college tuition was paid in full, while I worked 2 jobs and took out student loans. Every milestone, every achievement of mine was overshadowed by whatever Emma was doing at the time. But the worst part wasn't the material inequality. It was the emotional manipulation. Emma learned early how to weaponize my parents' favoritism. She would provoke me until I snapped, then run crying to our parents about how mean I was to her. They never questioned her version of events. I spent countless evenings grounded in my room, staring at the ceiling and wondering what I had done to deserve being born into the wrong role in this family dynamic. The pattern continued into our adult years. When I graduated college summa cum laude and landed a great job in marketing, the family dinner conversation centered around Emma's latest boyfriend or her struggles to find herself. When I got promoted to senior manager, Emma chose that same week to announce she was thinking about going back to school, effectively stealing any thunder I might have had. The romantic sabotage was perhaps the cruelest chapter in Emma's reign of terror over my life. It started in high school with my first serious boyfriend, Jake. We had been dating for 8 months when suddenly he became distant and eventually broke up with me via text. I was devastated, but the real knife to the heart came weeks later when I discovered he had been feeding information back to Emma the entire time we were dating. Emma had convinced him that she was worried about me and that he should report back on where we went, what we talked about, and how serious things were getting. When she decided I was getting too happy, she told Jake that I had been talking about other guys behind his back. Complete lies. But Jake believed her because, as he put it, "Why would your sister lie about something like that?" The pattern repeated itself through college and into my early 20s. Emma had a talent for identifying what made each guy special to me, then exploiting those exact qualities to drive them away. With David, my college boyfriend, she played up being the fun sister and slowly convinced him that I was too serious and boring. With Mark, she spread rumors about my supposed commitment issues. With Alex, she actually made a move on him at a family barbecue, then claimed I had given her permission because I wasn't that into him anyway. Each breakup left me more guarded, more reluctant to bring anyone around my family. Emma would comfort me afterward with fake sympathy, saying things like, "Don't worry, the right guy will see through all your issues, or maybe you're just meant to be alone for a while." The gaslighting was masterful. She would destroy my relationships, then position herself as the caring sister helping me through the aftermath. By my mid-20s, I had essentially given up on dating. The few relationships I attempted were kept strictly separate from my family. But even then, Emma had ways of finding out. She had convinced our parents that she was just being a protective big sister, looking out for me because I had poor judgment with men. They ate it up, praising her for caring so much about my well-being while I suffered in isolation. The loneliness was crushing. I watched friends get engaged and married while I couldn't even maintain a relationship long enough to meet their parents, let alone introduce them to mine. Emma, meanwhile, cycled through boyfriends like accessories, each one worshipping the ground she walked on until she got bored and moved on. Our parents saw this as her being selective and knowing her worth, while my singleton status was evidence of my personal failings. I began to believe their narrative. Maybe I was unlovable. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that drove people away. The self-doubt was poisonous, seeping into every aspect of my life. I threw myself into work, building walls around my heart and convincing myself that career success would have to be enough. Then I met Michael, and everything changed. It was at a professional conference in Chicago, far from my hometown and the toxic orbit of my family. Michael was a software engineer from Seattle, attending the same marketing tech seminar I was presenting at. He had dark hair, kind green eyes behind stylish glasses, and a quiet confidence that immediately drew me in. What struck me most was how he listened. Really listened. When I spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually absorbing and responding to what I said. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel heard that I almost didn't know how to handle it. We grabbed coffee after the seminar, then dinner, then spent the entire evening walking around downtown Chicago talking about everything from our careers to our favorite books to our travel dreams. Michael lived in Seattle, a comfortable 3-hour flight from my home in Denver. The distance initially felt like a blessing. It created a natural buffer between him and my family's chaos. We started with video calls and texts, getting to know each other without the pressure of constant proximity. For the first time in years, I was developing genuine feelings without Emma's interference. He was successful in his own right, having started a small but profitable app development company with 2 partners. More importantly, he was emotionally intelligent in ways that the men in my past hadn't been. When I mentioned my complicated family situation in vague terms, he didn't push for details but made it clear he was there if I wanted to talk. He had his own story of growing up with difficult parents, which created an understanding between us that I'd never experienced before. Our relationship blossomed over 6 months of long-distance dating. Michael would fly to Denver some weekends. I'd visit Seattle others, and we'd meet in random cities for mini adventures. It felt like living in a beautiful bubble, separate from all the toxicity I'd grown up with. He never pressured me to introduce him to my family, seeming to understand instinctively that there were complicated dynamics at play. When Michael finally did meet my parents, I was terrified. We had been dating for 8 months, and he had started talking about our future together. I knew I couldn't keep him separated from my family forever if things were going to get serious. I planned the introduction carefully, a casual lunch at a neutral restaurant, with Emma conveniently busy that day. The lunch went better than I had dared hope. My parents were on their best behavior, and Michael charmed them with his genuine interest in their stories and his obvious affection for me. For once, I felt proud introducing someone I cared about. My mother even pulled me aside afterward to say she liked him, which was more approval than I had received in years. But Emma couldn't stay away from my happiness for long. Within a week of meeting Michael, she had somehow obtained his phone number and social media information. She started small, liking his photos on Instagram, making innocent comments about how nice it was that I had found someone. Michael mentioned these interactions to me casually, not thinking much of them, but I felt that familiar dread settling in my stomach. Emma's campaign was subtle at first. She would text Michael directly about planning something special for my birthday, positioning herself as the thoughtful sister who wanted to coordinate with him. She'd send him old photos of me from high school and college, ostensibly to be sweet, but always choosing the most awkward or unflattering ones with comments like, "Sarah's always been such a late bloomer." The manipulation escalated when she learned that Michael's company was developing an app that could potentially benefit from some marketing consultation. Suddenly, Emma was very interested in his work, peppering him with questions and offering to connect him with people in her network. She had no meaningful professional network, but Michael didn't know that. He was flattered by her interest and grateful for what seemed like family support. I watched helplessly as Emma wove her web around yet another person I cared about. She was playing the long game this time, not going for immediate destruction but slowly positioning herself as the more dynamic, interesting sister. She'd share stories about her adventures and travels, always making sure to subtly highlight how boring and predictable my life was in comparison. "Sarah's such a homebody," she'd say with a laugh. "I'm trying to get her to be more spontaneous, but you know how she is." The worst part was that Michael started repeating some of her observations back to me, clearly believing he was being helpful. "Emma mentioned you might be interested in trying some new activities," he'd say. "Maybe we could plan something more adventurous for our next trip?" It was like watching my worst nightmare play out in slow motion. Emma was successfully repositioning herself as the person who understood me better than I understood myself. I tried to warn Michael without sounding paranoid or jealous. "Emma can be a lot sometimes," I said carefully. "She tends to insert herself into situations." But he saw this as typical sibling dynamics and was even more charmed by what he perceived as Emma's caring nature. "It's sweet that she's so invested in your happiness," he would say, making me feel like I was the problem for being suspicious. The breaking point came when Emma suggested that she and Michael plan a surprise party for my 27th birthday. She convinced him that I had always wanted a big celebration, but was too shy to ask for one. This was completely false. I actively disliked surprise parties and had told Michael as much early in our relationship. But Emma was persuasive, and Michael thought he was doing something wonderful for me. The surprise party was a disaster, exactly as Emma had planned. She invited people I barely knew, decorated with themes I actively disliked, and positioned herself as the hostess while I stood awkwardly in the corner of my own celebration. Worse, she had convinced Michael to give a speech about how she had helped him understand what would make me truly happy. I stood there, humiliated, as my boyfriend praised my sister for orchestrating an event that felt like a carefully crafted form of emotional torture. But Michael wasn't stupid. As the evening progressed and he saw how uncomfortable I was, he began to realize something was off. When I finally broke down in tears in my bedroom, he found me and demanded to know what was really going on. Through sobs, I told him everything. The years of sabotage, the pattern of manipulation, the way Emma had systematically destroyed every relationship I'd tried to build. I expected him to think I was crazy, to make excuses for Emma's behavior, or to decide that my family drama was too complicated to deal with. Instead, he held me while I cried and said quietly, "I believe you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." For the first time in my life, someone was choosing to believe my version of events over Emma's carefully constructed narrative. Michael had a strategic mind. It's what made him successful in business. Over the next few weeks, he began paying closer attention to Emma's behavior, documenting her manipulations and contradictions. He started feeding her false information to see what she would do with it, and sure enough, she would twist and use everything against me. He was building a case, gathering evidence of what I had been dealing with my entire life. When Michael proposed 6 months later, it was the happiest moment of my life. He did it privately, just the two of us on a weekend trip to Napa Valley, with a ring he had designed himself based on conversations we'd had about vintage jewelry. It was perfect, intimate, and completely separate from my family's chaos. For once, I had something that was purely mine. But we both knew that announcing our engagement would bring the family drama to a new level. Emma had never let me have a milestone moment to myself, and a wedding was the biggest milestone of all. We discussed strategy like we were planning a military operation, knowing that we needed to be prepared for whatever chaos she would try to create. We decided to tell my parents first, hoping that their approval of Michael might temper any immediate drama. The conversation went better than expected. They seemed genuinely happy for me and excited about the prospect of a wedding. My mother even got teary-eyed talking about her little girl getting married. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this time would be different. Emma's reaction to our engagement was initially surprising. She seemed genuinely happy for me, hugging both Michael and me with what appeared to be authentic joy. She immediately started talking about wedding plans, offering to help with everything from venue scouting to dress shopping. I was cautiously optimistic, wondering if maybe she had finally matured enough to let me have this moment. I should have known better. Within days, Emma had inserted herself into every aspect of our wedding planning. She had opinions about everything. The venue wasn't prestigious enough, the flowers I liked were too common, the dress style I was considering wasn't flattering for my figure. She accompanied me to every appointment, gradually taking over conversations with vendors and positioning herself as the decision-maker. My mother loved having Emma involved, constantly praising her for being such a supportive sister. "Isn't it wonderful how Emma is helping?" she would gush. "You're so lucky to have her guidance. She has such good taste." Meanwhile, I felt increasingly like a guest at my own wedding planning sessions, watching Emma make choices that aligned with her vision rather than mine. The financial arrangement made everything more complicated. My parents had offered to pay for the wedding, which was incredibly generous but came with strings attached. They wanted input on major decisions and expected regular updates on the planning progress. With Emma positioned as my helper, she became the primary communication channel between me and my parents about wedding details. Every conversation filtered through her perspective, every decision influenced by her preferences. Michael watched this dynamic with growing concern. In private, he would ask if I was really okay with the direction things were going, if the wedding we were planning was actually what I wanted. The truth was, I was so grateful to be getting married at all, to have found someone who truly loved me despite my family's attempts at sabotage, that I was willing to compromise on almost anything. I just wanted to make it to the altar without Emma finding a way to destroy this relationship too. But Emma wasn't satisfied with just controlling the wedding planning. She began making comments about how lucky I was that Michael was willing to take on someone with my baggage, how she hoped I wouldn't mess this up like I had with previous relationships. She'd make these remarks casually, in front of Michael, positioning them as sisterly concern. "Sarah tends to get overwhelmed by big events," she'd say. "I just want to make sure she doesn't self-sabotage." The psychological warfare was subtle but devastating. Emma was planting seeds of doubt about my stability and worthiness while simultaneously positioning herself as the reasonable, caring sister just trying to help. She was setting up a narrative where if anything went wrong with the wedding or the marriage, it would be because of my personal failings, not her interference. 3 months before the wedding, Emma dropped her bombshell. We were having dinner at my parents' house, discussing final wedding details, when she suddenly burst into tears. Through dramatic sobs, she explained that watching me plan my wedding had made her realize how much she had always dreamed of her own special day. She was 29 and single, having recently ended another relationship, and she was worried she might never get the chance to experience what I was experiencing. My mother immediately went into comfort mode, stroking Emma's hair and making soothing sounds. My father looked genuinely pained by his eldest daughter's distress. "Sweetie, your time will come," my mother said softly. "The right man is out there for you." But Emma shook her head, explaining that it wasn't about finding a man, it was about never getting to experience the feeling of walking down the aisle in a wedding dress, of having that one perfect moment that every girl dreams about. Then came the request that would change everything. Through her tears, Emma looked directly at me and said, "Sarah, I know this sounds crazy, but would you let me walk down the aisle at your wedding? Not as your maid of honor or anything that would interfere with your day, but maybe before the ceremony starts? I could wear a wedding dress and just have that moment of feeling like a bride. It would mean everything to me. and I promise it wouldn't take away from your special day at all." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, mouth open, trying to process what my sister had just asked. She wanted to wear a wedding dress and walk down the aisle at my wedding, to experience being a bride at my expense. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Emma. I looked at Michael, who was staring at Emma with undisguised disbelief. Before I could respond, my parents jumped in. "Oh, honey, that's such a sweet idea," my mother said, looking at me expectantly. "It would be such a beautiful way to include Emma in your special day. She's been so helpful with the planning. It's the least we could do." My father nodded in agreement. "It's not like it would interfere with your ceremony, Sarah. Just a few minutes beforehand. What do you say?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and list every single way this request was insane and inappropriate. I wanted to point out that Emma had manipulated every other milestone moment in my life and was now trying to literally insert herself into my wedding ceremony. But looking at my parents' expectant faces, I realized they genuinely thought this was a reasonable request. Emma had positioned it so perfectly. She wasn't trying to steal my thunder. She just wanted to experience a magical moment that life might not give her otherwise. Michael finally broke the silence. "That's quite a request, Emma," he said carefully. "This is obviously something Sarah and I need to discuss privately." Emma's face fell slightly. She had clearly expected me to agree immediately under the family pressure. But she quickly recovered, turning on her brightest smile. "Of course. I understand this is a big decision. I just hope you'll consider it. It would honestly be the best gift you could ever give me." That night, Michael and I had the most intense conversation of our relationship. I was torn between rage at Emma's manipulation and despair at my family's inability to see how inappropriate the request was. "She's trying to make your wedding about her," Michael said bluntly. "This isn't about her experiencing being a bride. It's about stealing your moment and making herself the center of attention on what should be your day." But the financial reality was complicated. My parents were paying for a wedding that would cost nearly $75,000. Money that Michael and I didn't have on our own. If we refused Emma's request and it caused a family rift, they might withdraw their financial support entirely. We would have to drastically downsize our wedding or postpone it indefinitely while we saved up the money ourselves. I spent sleepless nights agonizing over the decision. Part of me wanted to tell my family exactly what I thought of their request and plan a small ceremony that we could afford on our own. But another part of me, the part that had been beaten down by years of being the family scapegoat, wondered if maybe I was being selfish. Maybe Emma's request wasn't as unreasonable as it seemed. Maybe I should just be grateful that my parents were willing to pay for my wedding at all. Emma kept the pressure on in subtle ways over the following weeks. She would send me links to wedding dresses she was considering, asking for my opinion on what would photograph well. She talked about how excited she was about the possibility of finally experiencing her bridal moment, how much it would mean to her, how she had always dreamed of this opportunity. She framed it as me having the power to give her the greatest gift of her life. My mother joined the campaign, mentioning regularly how much Emma was looking forward to my decision. "She's been so sad lately," she would say during our weekly phone calls. "I think this would really lift her spirits. You know how hard it's been for her, watching all her friends get married while she's still single. This would be such a generous gesture." The manipulation was masterful because it wasn't technically about taking anything away from me. It was about giving Emma something she claimed to need for her emotional well-being. How could I be so selfish as to deny my sister a few minutes of happiness on a day when I would have hours of celebration? The guilt was overwhelming, exactly as Emma had intended. Michael watched me struggle with the decision and finally made a suggestion that changed everything. "What if we say yes?" he said quietly one evening. I stared at him in shock, wondering if he had lost his mind. But he continued, "What if we agree to their request, but we make sure it backfires spectacularly? I have an idea that might give your family exactly what they deserve." Michael's plan was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. We would agree to Emma's request and begin planning for her to have her bridal moment before our ceremony. But we would also secretly arrange for that moment to become the most humiliating experience of her life, while simultaneously extracting maximum value from my parents for financing their ridiculous demand. First, Michael negotiated with my parents about the additional costs Emma's request would create. Since she would need her own wedding dress, professional hair and makeup, flowers, and photography for her walk down the aisle, these expenses would need to be added to the wedding budget. "If we're going to do this," he told my parents, "we want to make sure Emma has the full experience she's looking for. That means she needs everything a real bride would have." My parents, thrilled that we were accommodating Emma's request, eagerly agreed to cover all additional costs. Michael then suggested that since we were already increasing the budget, maybe we should upgrade some other elements of the wedding too. "Sarah deserves the best," he said, "and if we're already spending more money, we might as well make sure every detail is perfect." Over the course of 2 months, Michael expertly guided my parents into upgrading virtually every aspect of our wedding. The venue was switched to a more prestigious location. The photography package was enhanced to include multiple shooters and a videographer. The reception menu was elevated to include premium options, and the flower arrangements were expanded to create a more dramatic aesthetic. What started as a $75,000 wedding quickly ballooned to nearly $125,000, all justified by the need to accommodate Emma's special moment. Emma was thrilled with the upgrades, seeing them as validation of her importance to the event. She spent hours selecting her wedding dress, ultimately choosing an elaborate gown that cost more than many people's entire wedding budgets. She booked appointments with high-end makeup artists and hairstylists, insisting that everything needed to be perfect for her photographs. She was planning to document every moment of her bridal experience, already talking about how she would frame the pictures and share them on social media. Meanwhile, Michael was quietly making other arrangements. He hired a private security team for our wedding, ostensibly to manage the large guest list and protect the expensive equipment and decorations. What my family didn't know was that these security guards had very specific instructions about Emma's participation in the ceremony. The week before the wedding, Michael sat down with the head of security and showed him multiple photos of Emma, making sure every guard would recognize her instantly. He explained that there had been some family drama around wedding planning and that Emma might try to disrupt the ceremony in various ways. The security team was instructed to prevent any disruption, using whatever means necessary to maintain the sanctity of our wedding day. 2 days before the wedding, Michael had a private conversation with our officiant, a friend of his who had agreed to perform the ceremony. He explained the situation with Emma and made sure the officiant understood that only one bride would be walking down the aisle: me. If anyone else attempted to participate in the ceremony wearing a wedding dress, they should be treated as a disruption and removed from the venue. The morning of our wedding, everything proceeded exactly as Emma expected. She arrived at the venue early for her hair and makeup appointments, glowing with excitement about finally getting her moment to shine. The photographers dutifully captured every moment of her preparation, and she posed eagerly in her elaborate gown, basking in the attention she had always craved. According to our published timeline, Emma was scheduled to walk down the aisle at 2:30 p.m., with my actual ceremony beginning at 3 p.m. At 2:25, Emma positioned herself at the back of the ceremony space, bouquet in hand, practically vibrating with anticipation. My parents watched proudly from the front row, beaming at their eldest daughter who looked radiant in white. But as Emma began her march toward the altar, one of the security guards stepped directly into her path. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely but firmly, "but I'm going to have to ask you to leave the ceremony area. We already have a bride here today, and our instructions are very clear about preventing disruptions to the wedding." Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, then disbelief, then growing rage. "I'm not disrupting anything," she protested. "This is planned. I'm supposed to walk down the aisle. Ask anyone." She gestured wildly toward my parents, who had started to stand up from their seats, clearly confused by what was happening. The security guard remained calm and professional. "Ma'am, I understand there may have been some miscommunication, but my instructions are clear. No one except the designated bride is permitted to participate in this ceremony. I'm going to have to escort you to the lobby area where you can change out of that dress and return as a regular guest." Emma's carefully constructed composure completely shattered. She began screaming about how this was all planned, how she was supposed to have her moment. How dare they treat her this way? The scene was everything I had ever dreamed of. Emma throwing a public tantrum in front of our entire extended family, looking absolutely unhinged in her inappropriate wedding dress, while security guards calmly contained her outburst. My parents rushed over, demanding to know what was happening. The security supervisor explained that they had strict instructions to prevent anyone from disrupting the wedding ceremony, and that included preventing anyone other than the bride from walking down the aisle in a wedding dress. "If you have documentation showing that this was authorized by the bride and groom, I'd be happy to review it," he said professionally. Of course, my parents had no such documentation. Emma's request had been made verbally at a family dinner, with no official approval or planning involved. Michael and I had never signed off on anything, never provided written authorization, never formally incorporated Emma's walk into the ceremony timeline. From the venue's perspective, Emma was simply a guest who had shown up in inappropriate attire and was trying to insert herself into someone else's wedding. The final humiliation came when Emma, still screaming and crying, had to be physically escorted out of the ceremony space by security. In front of 200 guests, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had never seen Emma's true personality, she was carried out kicking and screaming like a child having a meltdown. Her carefully applied makeup was streaking down her face, her expensive dress was wrinkled from the struggle, and her reputation was in absolute tatters. Michael and I exchanged vows 30 minutes later in a ceremony that was absolutely perfect. Emma was nowhere to be seen, having been given the choice to change into appropriate attire and return as a guest or leave the venue entirely. She chose to leave, taking my parents with her in a dramatic exit that only served to validate everything the family had just witnessed. As we danced at our reception, surrounded by friends and family members who kept congratulating us on how beautiful and meaningful the ceremony had been, I realized that Michael had given me something I never thought I would have: a wedding day that was completely and entirely mine. Emma's public meltdown had exposed her true nature to everyone who mattered. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who came out looking reasonable and mature. My parents tried to smooth things over in the weeks following our wedding, claiming that there had been a misunderstanding about Emma's role in the ceremony. But the damage was done. Our extended family had seen Emma's true colors, and many of them reached out privately to say they had always suspected there were issues but hadn't known how to address them. Michael's strategic approach had given me something I never expected: validation from people who mattered, and a wedding day that became the beginning of my real life, free from Emma's shadow. The best part was that my parents had paid for every penny of it. $125,000 for a wedding where their precious golden child was publicly humiliated and physically removed from the premises. It was the most expensive revenge they ever bought, and they had to smile and write the checks with their own hands.